The Ice Age wasn't a charming frozen landscape dotted with manageable challenges. It was a 2.6 million year stretch of relentless cold, testing how many different ways Earth could kill you through temperature alone, before you even factored in the collection of oversized nightmares built to function in conditions that would kill modern humans within hours. This was a world where the cold wasn't just uncomfortable, it was an active, aggressive force that could literally freeze your lungs mid-breath and shatter exposed skin like glass. Before there was even time to process the Pleistocene landscape, or realize the small hill ahead was actually a mammoth, the cold began its assault. This wasn't a chill that encouraged caution. It was cold so extreme that non-essential bodily functions shut down within minutes, preserving core organs while sacrificing extremities to frostbite. The danger was easy to underestimate. The Ice Age sat close enough to the present to feel survivable, familiar, even manageable. Humans had lived through parts of it, but survival only happened with sophisticated tools, tailored clothing, reliable fire, complex social structures, and hunting strategies refined over hundreds of thousands of years. Remove those advantages, and the illusion collapses fast, leaving an unprepared human exposed in a world where temperatures could plunge to minus 70 degrees Fahrenheit, while predators, far more dangerous than modern apex carnivores, moved freely across the land. And the environment never stayed still long enough to learn it. The Ice Age wasn't one continuous frozen hellscape. It was a cycle of glacial and interglacial periods marked by violent climate swings. Advancing ice sheets could bury entire mountain ranges under miles of frozen water, only to be followed by catastrophic glacial floods capable of reshaping river systems in days. During glacial maximums, average temperatures in ice-covered regions sat between minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit and minus 70 degrees Fahrenheit, with continental interiors dropping even lower. Exposed skin could frostbite in under 5 minutes. Wind made everything worse. Katabatic gusts pouring off glaciers at 60 to 80 miles per hour dragged effective temperatures toward minus 100 degrees Fahrenheit, turning exposure into a countdown. Breathing felt like inhaling broken glass. Fingers went numb. Judgment unraveled. And there was no escape, no lasting warmth, no reliable shelter that wasn't colder than the open air or already claimed by something else. The cold was constant, patient, and unforgiving. Those were the first minutes in the Ice Age, and the giants hadn't even entered the picture yet. You might be thinking that herbivores, plant eaters by definition, couldn't possibly be as dangerous as the apex predators. This comforting delusion will last approximately 3 seconds after you encounter your first woolly mammoth and realize that herbivore doesn't mean harmless. It means creature that doesn't need to eat you but will absolutely crush you into the permafrost if you annoy it, startle it, or simply exist in its personal space. Let's start with the icon of the Ice Age, the woolly mammoth. At 11 feet or 3.4 meters tall at the shoulder and weighing up to 6 tons, these weren't the gentle, family-friendly creatures portrayed in children's movies. They were walking tanks covered in shaggy fur, equipped with curved tusks that could reach 15 feet or 4.6 meters in length, and possessed the temperament of creatures that had to fight for every calorie in an environment where food was perpetually scarce. Those tusks weren't decorative, and a single swipe from a mammoth tusk could disembowel a cave lion. Imagine what it would do to a human who accidentally got between a mother mammoth and her calf. The American mastodon takes the oversized herbivore nightmare concept and adds a twist of pure aggression. At 10 feet or 3 meters tall and weighing 5 tons, mastodons were slightly smaller than mammoths, but made up for it with a disposition that made them the honey badgers of the megafauna world. Their tusks were straighter and more forward-pointing than mammoth tusks, optimized not for digging, but for combat. Fossil evidence shows mastodons engaging in brutal, territorial battles with each other, and these weren't ritualized displays. They were fights to the death, involving tusk wounds that penetrated deep into skulls and rib cages. Any creature willing to fight its own species that violently would have absolutely no hesitation about goring a human who wandered into its territory. If giant elephant relatives weren't bad enough, Megatherium took the concept even further. Standing up to 20 feet or 6 meters tall, when upright and weighing up to 6 tons, this giant ground sloth was a living bulldozer wrapped in fur, armed with claws measuring 8 inches or 20 centimeters long. An encounter with a curious Megatherium wouldn't be a hunt or a charge. It would be an inspection by a 4-ton animal with machete-sized claws, and no concept of restraint, where a single careless movement could end a human instantly. Giant bison latifrons, had horns that spanned 7 feet from tip to tip, making them the largest horns of any known bovid. At about 6.6 feet, tall at the shoulder and weighing over a ton, these bison could bulldoze through snowdrifts that would stop most other animals, creating trails that other species depended on for migration. The herding behavior of giant bison created another category of danger. Modern bison stampedes are legendary for their destructive power. Imagine that same phenomenon, but with animals 50% larger and equipped with the hornspans wider than a compact car. Being caught in a giant bison stampede wouldn't just mean being trampled, it would mean being gored, tossed, and pulverized simultaneously by hundreds of tons of panicked herbivore. The woolly rhinoceros brings a new dimension to Ice Age herbivore terror, pure, blind aggression backed by several tons of armored muscle. Woolly rhinos possessed a horn that could reach 3 feet or 1 meter in length. Not a decorative appendage, but a weapon specifically designed for impaling predators foolish enough to attack them. Modern rhinos are notoriously aggressive and will charge anything they perceive as a threat, which includes basically everything that moves. Woolly rhinos, living in an environment where every calorie had to be fought for and predators were constantly testing for weakness, would have been even more aggressive and trigger-happy with their charging behavior. But perhaps the most nightmarish herbivore was Elasmotherium, also known as the Siberian unicorn. This nightmare stood 6 feet or 1.8 meters tall at the shoulder, stretched 15 feet or 4.6 meters long, weighed 4 tons, and sported a single massive horn on its forehead that could reach 6 feet or 1.8 meters in length. There was nothing mythical about it, despite the name unicorn. Elasmotherium was a 4-ton animal built to break things, ground, rivals, and anything that stood in its way. But here's what made Ice Age herbivores collectively nightmarish. The resource scarcity of their environment made them all perpetually on edge, aggressive, and willing to use violence as a first resort rather than a last one. Modern herbivores in abundant environments can afford to flee from potential threats. Ice Age herbivores lived in a world where fleeing meant abandoning hard-won feeding grounds, where every retreat could mean starvation, and where standing ground against predators was often the only viable survival strategy. This created a landscape populated by herbivores that were essentially armed, armored, and in a constant state of defensive aggression. You wouldn't just be avoiding being eaten. You'd be navigating a minefield of multi-ton creatures that would kill you for the simple crime of existing in their general vicinity during a period when they were hungry, cold, and not in the mood for surprises. And that brings us to the even more disturbing reality. If the herbivores that weren't trying to eat you were this dangerous, imagine what the actual predators were like. If you've made it this far without completely abandoning the concept of Ice Age time travel, congratulations. What comes next are the predators that would make you wish you'd been trampled by a mammoth instead. These weren't just large carnivores. They were the culmination of millions of years of refined, brutal selective pressures of Ice Age conditions into killing machines so efficient that modern apex predators look like amateurs in comparison. Let's start with Smilodon fatalis, the saber-toothed cat that has become synonymous with Ice Age predation. Smilodon didn't bite down on prey like modern cats. Instead, it would use its incredibly powerful forelimbs and retractable claws, much larger than those of modern big cats, to wrestle prey to the ground and pin it in place. Then, those massive canines would be driven into the throat or belly of the victim with surgical precision, severing major blood vessels and causing rapid death through exsanguination. The killing technique was so refined that Smilodon could take down prey much larger than itself. But here's what made it truly terrifying. Fossil evidence from the La Brea tar pits shows Smilodon hunting in family groups. This wasn't a solitary ambush predator. It was a coordinated pack hunter with weapons-grade dentistry and the tactical intelligence to bring down megafauna that individually outweighed it by several tons. But Smilodon wasn't even the largest cat-prowling Ice Age landscapes. The cave lion, Panthera spelaea, was 25% larger than modern African lions. These weren't just bigger versions of modern lions. They were called adapted super predators that hunt in conditions where prey was scarce and every kill had to count. The American lion, Panthera atrox, was even larger, making it one of the largest cats to ever exist. These were apex predators in the truest sense. They feared nothing, preyed on everything, and operated in environments so harsh that simply surviving required them to be more efficient killing machines than any predator that came before. Homotherium, the scimitar cat, represents a different approach to Ice Age predation. With shorter, serrated saber teeth that were designed more for slashing than stabbing, Homotherium was built for endurance hunting rather than ambush attacks. At 4 feet or 1.2 meters at the shoulder and weighing 400 pounds or 190 kilograms, these cats had proportionally longer legs than other Ice Age felines, suggesting they could pursue prey over long distances across open tundra. Evidence suggests it specifically targeted young mammoths and other megafauna juveniles. Being hunted by a predator that had spent millions of years perfecting techniques for killing creatures 10 times its size would be like being stalked by a creature that considered elephants to be its natural prey and viewed you as a convenient appetizer. But if you think the cats were bad, Arctodus simus, the short-faced bear, was worse. At 12 feet or 3.7 meters tall, when standing upright and weighing up to 2,000 pounds or 900 kilograms, short-faced bears were the largest mammalian land predators of the Ice Age. They possessed legs longer than those of any other bear species, giving them a stride length that allowed them to cover ground with horrifying efficiency. It could run at speeds up to 40 miles per hour or 64 kilometers per hour, faster than any human, faster than most other large Ice Age animals, fast enough to run down prey across open tundra where there was nowhere to hide. And unlike modern bears that are omnivores, short-faced bears were hypercarnivores, meaning their diet was almost exclusively meat. You weren't a potential threat to be avoided. You were calories on legs. Cave bears, Ursus spelaeus, stood up to 10 feet or 3 meters tall and often weighed between 1,300 and 2,200 pounds or 600 to 1,000 kilograms, with the largest males possibly exceeding that. But their danger came from territorial aggression rather than active predation. These bears were primarily herbivorous, but would defend their cave territories with extreme violence. And remember, caves were the only potential shelter from Ice Age temperatures, meaning you'd inevitably come into conflict with these territorial nightmares. Polar bears, during the Ice Age, were comparable in size to modern individuals, with some large males potentially at the upper end of today's size range. Unlike modern polar bears that primarily hunt seals, Ice Age polar bears had access to a much wider variety of prey and had developed hunting strategies optimized for taking down terrestrial prey on pack ice and frozen tundra. Then we have the dire wolves, Canis dirus, which represent perhaps the most psychologically disturbing predators of the Ice Age. Individual dire wolves weren't dramatically larger than modern grey wolves. What made them terrifying was their pack hunting behaviour and their sheer numbers. Fossil evidence from La Brea shows that dire wolves hunted in packs that could number in the dozens. Being pursued by 30 to 40 dire wolves would be like facing a military unit where every soldier was equipped with natural weapons and operated according to coordinated pack tactics refined over millions of years. But at least with apex predators, you could usually see them coming. Large, obvious threats. In practice, they were often the least of your concerns in terms of probability of encounter. Massive predators were rare, limited by the carrying capacity of Ice Age ecosystems. There simply wasn't enough prey to support large populations of 2,000-pound bears or 900-pound cats. But the medium and small-sized predators, those were everywhere, operating in packs, desperately hungry, and far more willing to take risks on unfamiliar prey. Let's start with the cave hyena, Crocuta spelea, which was substantially larger than modern spotted hyenas and possessed one of the strongest bite forces of any Ice Age carnivore relative to body size. Modern spotted hyenas are bold enough to drive lions away from kills. Cave hyenas operated in larger packs and were competing with saber-toothed cats, cave lions, and short-faced bears for resources, which meant they had an even more aggressive and confrontational approach to feeding. And then there were the opportunists like Ice Age wolverines, larger and more formidable than modern wolverines, which is genuinely terrifying considering modern wolverines are already known for their fearless aggression and willingness to fight animals many times their size. They didn't need to be huge, they just needed to be desperate and persistent. But even if you somehow avoided all of that, you'd still have to deal with the fundamental problem that made all other dangers irrelevant. Starvation was next. Finding edible food in the Ice Age without tools, weapons, or inherited knowledge was nearly impossible. The cruel irony was that you'd be surrounded by millions of tons of potential food in the form of animals, yet have no realistic way to access any of it. Plant life offered little help. The landscape was dominated by tundra vegetation, lichens, mosses, sedges, and dwarf willows that provided minimal calories and were often indigestible or toxic without generations of adaptation. Root vegetables were locked beneath permafrost, frozen solid to depths of hundreds of feet, and berries or nuts appeared only briefly in scattered pockets for a few weeks each year. Hunting wasn't the solution it sounds like. Bringing down a woolly mammoth without weapons meant getting within arm's reach of a 6-ton animal armed with 15-foot tusks, then surviving long enough to track it across frozen tundra and butcher tons of frozen meat while predators closed in. Smaller prey weren't easier. Reindeer and wild horses were faster, better adapted to snow, and impossible to run down once the cold erased any endurance advantage. And then there was the math. Simply staying alive burned 5,000 to 7,000 calories a day. The energy required to move, hunt, gather fuel, and stay warm exceeded what could be replaced. Starvation weakened the body, reduced heat production, and accelerated hypothermia. Survival wasn't measured in weeks. And even that wasn't the end of it. Glacial lake outburst floods could erase you in seconds, releasing walls of water moving at highway speeds. Hidden crevasses collapsed without warning. Blizzards reduced the world to white out, driving wind chill into lethal ranges where survival became a countdown. Ice Age terrain was shaped into something hostile to navigation itself. Thousands of miles of featureless tundra, reshaped daily by wind and snow. No trails, no landmarks. Frozen rivers looked like highways until the ice failed, plunging you into water cold enough to steal consciousness in under a minute. At every step, the Ice Age closed in, until there was nowhere left to go. So, could you do it? Could you survive the Ice Age? Or would you rather flip to the next page in the Prehistoric time travel catalogue and see if the Cretaceous offers any better odds? And as always, this is Roaring Echo. Thank you for watching.